Sir, I'm afraid people like you don't belong in establishments like this. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable at the Popeyes down the street. The words hung in the Beverly Hills air like poison echoing through the marble halls of the Sterling Club. Madison Cooper, 25 years old with perfectly styled blonde hair and a smile that could cut glass, stood behind the mahogany hostess station like a gatekeeper of privilege. Her manicured fingers drummed against the leather-bound reservation book as she stared down at the man before her. Marcus Washington stood perfectly still in his tailored Tom Ford suit, his expression calm as marble. The only sign of emotion was the slight tightening around his dark eyes. At 40 years old, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had climbed mountains others couldn't even see. His Hermes briefcase sat at his feet, and a Patek Philippe watch gleamed subtly on his wrist. Around them, the exclusive club fell into an uncomfortable silence. Crystal glasses stopped clinking. Whispered conversations about stock portfolios and yacht clubs died mid-sentence. The kind of people who paid $500,000 just for the privilege of membership turned in their leather chairs to witness what was unfolding. Madison's voice carried that particular tone of false concern that wealthy white women had perfected over generations. I'm sure you understand. This establishment has certain standards. She let the word hang there, loaded with implications that everyone in the room understood perfectly. Marcus checked his Patek Philippe. 7:30 p.m. He had exactly 30 minutes before his business partner arrived. 30 minutes to endure what he'd experienced 1,000 times before, in 1,000 different ways in boardrooms and country clubs across America. But tonight would be different. Tonight, Madison Cooper and everyone else in the Sterling Club would learn what real power looked like. Miss Cooper, Marcus said softly, his voice carrying a dangerous calm that made several nearby diners lean forward. After tonight, you'll understand what happens when you underestimate the wrong person. Something in his tone made Madison's confident smile falter just slightly, just enough to plant the first seed of doubt in her perfectly curated world. The revenge had already begun. She just didn't know it yet. To understand what happened that night at the Sterling Club, you need to understand where Marcus Washington came from, because the man standing in that marble lobby wasn't born into wealth. He was forged by fire, shaped by rejection, and tempered by a mother's dying promise. Detroit, 1992. 8-year-old Marcus pressed his nose against the window of Giovanni's Italian restaurant, watching families in expensive clothes laugh over plates of food that cost more than his mother made in a week. Sarah Washington worked 3 jobs cleaning offices at night, stocking shelves during the day, and doing laundry for wealthy families on weekends. Her hands were permanently cracked from bleach and hard work, but her eyes still held dreams. "Someday, baby," she whispered to Marcus as they walked past the restaurant they couldn't afford to enter. "Someday, we'll eat in places like that." When Marcus was 10, Sarah finally saved enough money to take him to a nice restaurant for his birthday. They dressed in their best clothes, Sarah in a dress she'd bought from Goodwill, and carefully mended Marcus in a button-down shirt she'd ironed 3 times until it was perfect. They walked into the Riverside Inn with hope in their hearts and $27 in Sarah's purse. "I'm sorry," the hostess said without even looking up from her reservation book. "We're fully booked." Marcus could see empty tables scattered throughout the dining room. His mother's face crumpled for just a moment before she straightened her shoulders and took his hand. They walked out in silence, but as they reached the parking lot, Marcus made a promise that would change everything. "One day, Mama," he said, his small voice fierce with determination. "One day, I'll own places like this, and I'll make sure nobody ever gets turned away because of how they look." Sarah smiled through her tears and squeezed his hand. "I believe you, baby. I believe you will." But Sarah Washington never lived to see her son's promise fulfilled. Cancer took her when Marcus was 16, leaving him with nothing but her faith in his potential and a burning determination to prove that a poor black kid from Detroit could reshape the world. The path wasn't easy. Marcus earned a full scholarship to Harvard Business School, where he was often the only black face in rooms full of privilege. He started his first tech company at 22, with $3,000 borrowed from his landlord and a laptop he'd bought secondhand. That company failed. So did the second one. And the third. By 25, Marcus was sleeping on friends' couches and eating ramen noodles for dinner, watching his Harvard classmates land six-figure jobs at their father's companies. But failure had taught him something that privilege never could: how to survive when everything was against you. His breakthrough came at 28 with an artificial intelligence application that could predict consumer behavior with 97% accuracy. Google bought it for $2.3 billion, making Marcus one of the youngest black billionaires in American history. But money was never the point. Power was never the goal. What drove Marcus Washington was something deeper: the memory of his mother's face when they were turned away from that restaurant. The promise he'd made to a dying woman who believed in him when nobody else would. Over the next 12 years, Marcus built Washington Enterprises into a $15 billion empire, spanning technology, real estate, and hospitality. He owned 23 restaurants, now each one a testament to inclusive excellence. But there was one target that had eluded him, one symbol of exclusion that remained untouchable: the Sterling Club. Founded in 1952 by the Sterling family as a private dining establishment for discerning clientele, it had remained a bastion of old money exclusivity for 70 years. The membership list read like a who's who of American privilege: Hollywood royalty, tech moguls, and politicians who shaped policy over $30,000 bottles of wine. Marcus had been monitoring the Sterling Club for 5 years, waiting for the right moment to make his move. He'd applied for membership 6 months ago, knowing he'd be rejected. He'd documented every slight, every coded phrase, every unfortunate delay in processing his application. Tonight, standing in that marble lobby, while Madison Cooper told him he didn't belong, Marcus Washington wasn't just a successful businessman being discriminated against. He was a son fulfilling a promise to his mother. He was justice delayed, finally becoming justice served. The scared little boy who'd been turned away from the Riverside Inn was gone. In his place stood a man with the power to buy and sell entire establishments, a man who'd learned that the best revenge wasn't getting even. It was taking over completely. The valet's eyes widened as the midnight blue Rolls-Royce Phantom glided to a stop in front of the Sterling Club's imposing entrance. The car was worth more than most people's homes, but Marcus Washington stepped out of it like he was getting off a city bus. Confidence, he'd learned, wasn't about showing off wealth. It was about carrying yourself like you belonged everywhere you went, even when everywhere you went tried to tell you otherwise. The Sterling Club rose before him like a monument to exclusivity. Built in the style of a 19th century English manor, it featured hand-carved limestone facades, leaded glass windows, and brass fixtures that gleamed like gold. Every detail screamed old money, from the perfectly manicured topiaries flanking the entrance to the doorman, whose uniform probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Marcus adjusted his Tom Ford suit jacket and checked his reflection in the car's tinted window. Armor came in many forms, and tonight his was Italian silk and quiet confidence. He'd learned long ago that racists expected anger, expected confrontation. What they never expected was absolute calm in the face of their prejudice. That calm was his greatest weapon. The club's interior was a masterpiece of intimidation disguised as elegance. Persian rugs worth small fortunes covered marble floors. Oil paintings of long-dead white men in military uniforms stared down from gilded frames. Crystal chandeliers cast everything in a warm golden glow that suggested centuries of tradition that had carefully excluded people who looked like Marcus for every one of those centuries. The dining room hummed with the particular energy of wealth and power. At one table, a tech billionaire discussed acquiring his fifth vacation home. At another, a movie producer name-dropped celebrities like they were old friends. The average net worth in the room probably exceeded the GDP of small countries. And not a single person looked like Marcus Washington. He'd done his research, of course. The Sterling Club claimed to have over 2,000 members, but fewer than 12 were black. The club insisted this was simply a matter of maintaining our traditional culture, but Marcus knew discrimination when he saw it. He'd been seeing it his whole life. Madison Cooper stood at the hostess station, like a blonde sentinel, her smile as polished as the silver service behind her. 25 years old, Stanford graduate trust fund baby, who'd never worked a real day in her life, but somehow felt qualified to judge who deserved respect. She wore her privilege like perfume, invisible to her, overwhelming to everyone else. Marcus approached the station with measured steps, his footsteps silent on the Persian rug. He'd walked this approach 100 times in his mind, planned every word, anticipated every excuse. This wasn't his first encounter with Madison Cooper. 6 months ago, she'd accepted his membership application with false sweetness, promising to process it as quickly as possible. 6 months of delays, of unreturned phone calls, of requirements that seemed to multiply every time he met them. Tonight, the waiting ended. "Good evening," Marcus said, his voice carrying the warmth of someone genuinely pleased to be there. "Marcus Washington. I have a 7:30 reservation." Madison's smile didn't waver, but something cold flickered in her blue eyes. She made a show of checking her reservation book, turning pages she knew were blank. "I'm sorry, Mr. Washington. Was it, I don't see any reservation under that name." Marcus pulled out his phone and showed her the confirmation email. 7:30 p.m. Table for 2. Confirmed 6 hours ago through the club's private concierge service. Madison glanced at the screen for exactly half a second before looking back up with that practiced smile. "I'm afraid there must be some mistake." And that's when the night really began. "I'm sorry, but your application is still under review." Madison's voice carried the kind of condescending sweetness that made Marcus's jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. She spoke to him like he was a child who'd wandered into the wrong building, lost and confused. Marcus placed his phone on the mahogany hostess stand, the confirmation email still glowing on the screen. The timestamp was clear: 1:47 p.m., 6 hours ago. "Miss Cooper, as you can see, this reservation was confirmed through your private concierge service. I spoke directly with James Ashworth about tonight's dinner." Madison didn't even pretend to look at the phone this time. Instead, she closed the reservation book with a soft thud that somehow sounded final. "Mr. Ashworth is unavailable for people like you." The phrase hung in the air like a slap. Around them, conversations continued, but Marcus could feel the subtle shift in attention. The kind of privileged audience that dined at the Sterling Club had excellent peripheral vision when it came to potential drama. "People like me," Marcus repeated softly, his voice carrying no emotion whatsoever. "Could you clarify what you mean by that, Miss Cooper?" For just a moment, Madison's perfect composure cracked. Her cheeks flushed pink, and she glanced around as if suddenly aware that others might be listening. But privilege had trained her well in the art of plausible deniability. "I simply mean that Mr. Ashworth handles memberships for our established clientele. This is a very exclusive establishment, as I'm sure you understand." Marcus checked his Patek Philippe. 7:35. "I see. And how exactly does one become established enough to warrant Mr. Ashworth's attention?" The question was a trap, and they both knew it. Any honest answer would reveal the discrimination that everyone in the room understood, but nobody would say aloud. Madison's solution was to simply ignore the question entirely. "Are you sure you have the right address?" she asked, instead, her voice bright with false helpfulness. "This isn't a public restaurant. Perhaps you're looking for somewhere more accessible." Each word was chosen carefully. Each phrase a small cut designed to make Marcus doubt himself, to make him feel small and out of place. It was the death by 1,000 cuts approach that privileged institutions had perfected over generations. Marcus pulled out his wallet, a simple black leather billfold that didn't scream wealth but whispered quality to those who knew how to look. He removed his driver's license and placed it on the hostess stand next to his phone. "This is the correct address," he said calmly. "I'm Marcus Washington. I applied for membership 6 months ago. I've been invited to dine tonight by James Ashworth to discuss my application status." Madison glanced at the license like it might bite her. "Do you have any other verification?" "This establishment requires proper identification from all guests." The implication was clear: his California driver's license somehow wasn't proper enough. Marcus had seen this dance before. The moving goalposts, the shifting requirements, the endless bureaucracy designed to exhaust patience and dignity until people like him simply gave up and went away. But Marcus Washington had never learned how to give up. From his jacket pocket, he produced a platinum American Express Centurion card, the infamous black card that required a 7-figure annual income just to qualify. He placed it on the hostess stand next to his driver's license and phone. Madison's eyes widened slightly as she recognized the card, but she recovered quickly. "I'm sorry, but payment method isn't really the issue here. This is about membership status and cultural fit." Cultural fit, the phrase that had replaced openly racist language in corporate boardrooms and exclusive clubs across America. It meant the same thing it had always meant, but now it came wrapped in the language of business necessity. Across the dining room, a young Asian man with perfectly styled hair and an expensive camera discreetly pointed his phone in their direction. Tyler Chen had built a following of 2 million by documenting the hidden world of luxury establishments, but he'd never expected to witness something like this. His finger hovered over the Go Live button on Instagram, sensing that history was about to unfold. Marcus noticed the phone pointed in his direction and gave the slightest nod of acknowledgement. He'd learned long ago that witnesses were crucial when dealing with institutional racism. Without documentation, discrimination simply became a case of he said, she said, and establishments like the Sterling Club had very expensive lawyers. "Miss Cooper," Marcus said, his voice carrying a new edge that made several nearby diners look up from their conversations. "I think there might be some confusion here about who exactly you're dealing with." Madison's laugh was bright and dismissive. "Sir, I don't care if you're Oprah Winfrey herself. This is a private club with very specific membership requirements, and frankly—" She stopped mid-sentence as Marcus's phone began to ring. The caller ID was visible to anyone standing nearby. Warren B., as in Warren Buffett. One of the richest men in America was calling Marcus Washington at 7:37 p.m. on a Tuesday evening. The kind of call that didn't happen unless you moved in very particular circles. Marcus looked at Madison with that same calm expression, his thumb hovering over the answer button. "Excuse me, Miss Cooper. I need to take this call. Warren." "This isn't a great time," Marcus said as he answered the call, his voice carrying the casual familiarity of someone who regularly spoke with billionaires. "I'm actually in the middle of something interesting." The voice on the other end was audible to anyone standing nearby, Warren Buffett's distinctive Nebraska drawl, discussing what sounded like a $500 million acquisition deal. Marcus responded with the kind of specific financial details that couldn't be faked, mentioning profit margins and market analyses that made several eavesdropping diners lean closer to their table. Madison Cooper's perfectly composed mask was beginning to crack. Her eyes darted between Marcus's calm expression and the phone conversation that was rapidly destroying her assumption about who she was dealing with. Around them, the subtle shift in attention was becoming less subtle. The Sterling Club's clientele might be exclusive, but they weren't stupid. They recognized power when they heard it. "I'll call you back in 20 minutes, Warren Marcus concluded. "I'm handling a customer service situation that requires my immediate attention." He ended the call and looked at Madison with that same unreadable expression. "Now, Miss Cooper, where were we?" "Before." Madison could respond. A new voice cut through the tension, like a knife through silk. "Miss Cooper, what seems to be the problem here?" James Ashworth appeared from the direction of the private dining rooms, his silver hair perfectly styled, and his expression carrying the practiced concern of someone who'd spent decades managing crises. At 62, he'd been the Sterling Club's membership director for 15 years, and he could smell trouble from across the dining room. "Mr. Ashworth," Madison said, relief flooding her voice. "This gentleman claims to have a reservation, but his application is still under review." "And Marcus Washington?" Marcus interrupted smoothly, extending his hand to Ashworth. "I believe we spoke this afternoon about tonight's dinner meeting." Ashworth's handshake was firm, but brief, his eyes taking in Marcus's expensive suit, the platinum card still sitting on the hostess stand, and the growing audience of curious diners. Like Madison, he was skilled in the art of polite exclusion, but he was also smart enough to recognize when a situation was spiraling beyond control. "Of course," Mr. Washington, Ashworth said, with practiced smoothness. "I do apologize for the confusion. Miss Cooper is still learning our procedures." The slight emphasis on procedures was code that Madison understood immediately. She'd overplayed her hand, been too obvious in her discrimination. The Sterling Club's reputation depended on maintaining plausible deniability in all situations. "Perhaps we could seat you temporarily while we sort out the membership details." Ashworth continued. "We have a lovely table in our waiting area." "The waiting area?" Marcus almost smiled at the euphemism. Every exclusive establishment had won the uncomfortable seats in the corner, where undesirable guests could be tucked away, while management figured out how to get rid of them without causing a scene. "That would be acceptable," Marcus said graciously, "though I should mention that my dinner companion will be arriving shortly. I'd hate for there to be any confusion when he arrives." Something in Marcus's tone made Ashworth pause. "Your dinner companion, Michael Sterling?" Marcus said casually, watching as both Ashworth and Madison went very still. "I believe you know the name." If Warren Buffett's phone call had been a warning shot, mentioning Michael Sterling was a direct hit. The Sterling family didn't just have membership at the Sterling Club, they owned it, had owned it for 3 generations. Michael Sterling III was not just a member. He was effectively royalty. Ashworth's professional composure cracked slightly. "Michael Sterling is joining you for dinner." "Harvard roommates," Marcus explained with a slight smile. "We try to catch up whenever I'm in Los Angeles. I hope that won't be a problem." The question was rhetorical, and everyone knew it. The Sterling Club could turn away Marcus Washington, but they couldn't refuse service to a Sterling, which meant they couldn't refuse service to Marcus either, not if he was dining with the owner's son. Madison looked like she might be sick. The confident hostess who'd been so certain of her authority moments before now faced the horrifying realization that she'd just discriminated against someone connected to the club's founding family. Tyler Chen's Instagram live stream was gaining viewers by the minute. His whispered commentary had attracted over 1,500 people, and the hashtag #SterlingClubExposed was beginning to trend among Los Angeles food and lifestyle influencers. "Of course not," Ashworth said quickly. "Miss Cooper, please escort Mr. Washington to table 12. Our best table, naturally. Table 12. Not the waiting area after all, but prime real estate in the center of the dining room, where everyone could see who was important enough to rate the Sterling Club's finest treatment. As they walked through the dining room, Marcus took mental notes, with the eye of someone who'd built an empire by understanding how systems worked. The Sterling Club operated on approximately 60% capacity, 40 empty seats in a room designed for 100. The staff was overwhelmingly white, the guests even more so. The average table spent roughly $300 on dinner, not including wine, which meant the club was leaving serious money on the table with their exclusionary practices. Roberto Martinez, the waiter assigned to table 12, approached with the nervous energy of someone who'd witnessed the entire confrontation from across the room. He was one of the few Latino staff members Marcus had seen, and his eyes held a mixture of sympathy and curiosity. "Good evening, sir," Roberto said quietly. "Can I start you with something to drink while you wait for your companion?" "Just water for now," Marcus replied, then did something that made Roberto's eyes widen in surprise. He pulled out a $100 bill and placed it on the table. "Thank you for your professionalism tonight." Roberto had been serving tables for 8 years, but he'd never received a $100 tip for bringing someone water. More importantly, he'd never had a guest treat him with such respect after being treated so poorly themselves. As Roberto walked away, he couldn't help but wonder who exactly Marcus Washington was, and why his presence seemed to have turned the Sterling Club upside down. The answer to that question was about to walk through the front door. At exactly 7:55 p.m., a silver Bentley Continental pulled up to the Sterling Club's entrance. The valet practically sprinted to open the door, and out stepped a man who looked like he'd been cast by Hollywood as the perfect representation of American privilege. Michael Sterling III was 35 years old, 6 feet 2 inches of blonde hair and blue eyes, with the kind of effortless confidence that came from never having to prove he belonged anywhere. His Tom Ford suit was cut slightly different than Marcus's more traditional old money, rather than new money. But the two men shared something that transcended their different backgrounds. They both moved through the world like they owned it. Because in many ways, they did. Madison Cooper's transformation was instantaneous and complete. The cold hostess who'd spent 20 minutes trying to exclude Marcus Washington became a portrait of servile enthusiasm the moment Michael Sterling entered her field of vision. "Mr. Sterling," she gushed, her voice climbing an octave as she abandoned her post to greet him personally. "What an absolute pleasure to see you this evening. Your usual table." Michael's smile was polite but distant as he handed his coat to the approaching attendant. "Actually, Madison, I'm dining with a friend tonight, Marcus Washington. I believe he's already here." The question was casual, but Madison's face went through a remarkable series of expressions: confusion, recognition, and growing horror as the pieces clicked into place. The black man she'd tried to exclude wasn't just a random applicant. He was here at the personal invitation of the club's owner. Of course, she managed, her voice now slightly strangled. "Mr. Washington is at table 12. I'll escort you immediately." "No need," Michael said easily. "I know the way." He walked through the dining room like a king returning to his castle, nodding to familiar faces and accepting the subtle bows of acknowledgement that old money commanded. But anyone watching closely would have noticed that his path through the room was deliberately theatrical, ensuring that every diner could see exactly who he was there to meet. Marcus stood as Michael approached, and the two men embraced with the warmth of genuine friendship. To the watching crowd, it was a master class in social dynamics. Old money, legitimizing new money. White privilege, extending its protection to black excellence. Marcus Michael said loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. "So sorry I'm late." The board meeting ran long, but when Warren Buffett starts talking about market trends, you don't interrupt. The casual name drop was deliberate, designed to establish Marcus's credentials for anyone who might have missed the earlier phone call. Michael Sterling didn't just know who Marcus Washington was. He moved in the same rarefied circles. No problem at all, Marcus replied, his voice carrying just the right note of familiarity. I've been enjoying the atmosphere. Michael's eyes flickered to Madison, who was standing nearby, looking like she wanted to disappear into the Persian rug. I hope Madison has been taking excellent care of you. The Sterling family has always prided itself on hospitality. The comment was a verbal landmine, and Madison knew it. Any complaint about her treatment would reflect directly on the family name, but denying problems would be an obvious lie to anyone who'd witnessed the earlier confrontation. Miss Cooper has been educational, Marcus said, diplomatically. Michael's smile didn't waver, but something cold flickered in his blue eyes as he looked at Madison. Educational. How interesting. I do hope you've learned something valuable tonight, Madison. As they settled into their seats, Tyler Chen's Instagram live stream was exploding. The viewer count had climbed past 3,000, and comments were flooding in faster than he could read them. The hashtag Sterling Club Exposed was trending not just in Los Angeles, but across social media platforms, with screenshots and screen recordings spreading the story beyond Tyler's original audience. You know, Michael said, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet dining room, I was just telling Marcus about our Harvard days. Do you remember that dinner party, Marcus? The one where that venture capitalist said you didn't look like founder material? Marcus's smile was sharp as a blade. I remember. You walked out with me that night. Cost you a potential investment in your startup. Best decision I ever made, Michael replied loudly. That company folded within 6 months. Turns out judging people by their appearance isn't a great business strategy. The conversation was perfectly choreographed, each revelation designed to establish Marcus's credentials while highlighting the absurdity of his earlier treatment. Around them, diners were beginning to pull out their phones, some Googling Marcus's name, others recording what was clearly becoming a significant moment. Madison approached their table with visible reluctance, her server's pad trembling slightly in her hands. The confident hostess was gone, replaced by someone who was beginning to understand the magnitude of her mistake. Can I take your orders?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Actually," Michael said cheerfully, "I think we need a few more minutes to decide. But while we're waiting, maybe you could tell us about the club's membership policies. Marcus has been going through the application process, and I'm curious about any potential delays in approval." The question was innocent enough, but it landed like a physical blow. Madison's face went white as she realized she was being asked to explain in front of the club's owner why she'd been systematically obstructing his friend's membership application. The membership committee handles all applications according to established procedures," she stammered. "Established procedures?" Marcus repeated thoughtfully. "Could you clarify what those procedures entail?" "Miss Cooper, it was a trap with no escape. Any honest explanation of the procedures would reveal the discriminatory practices that everyone understood, but nobody officially acknowledged. Any evasive answer would be obviously dishonest to the dozen diners who were now openly listening to every word." Michael leaned back in his chair with the casual arrogance of someone who'd never faced a moment of uncertainty in his privileged life. "You know, Madison, my grandfather founded this club on the principle of bringing together the most successful people in Los Angeles. I'd hate to think that those principles weren't being honored today." The threat was subtle, but unmistakable. Madison's job, her career, her entire identity was built around her position at the Sterling Club. And the club's owner was essentially asking her to explain why she'd been discriminating against his personal friend. Roberto appeared at the table with perfect timing, his professional instincts telling him that the situation needed diffusing. "Gentlemen, can I interest you in our wine selection while you review the menu?" "Excellent idea," Michael said. "Marcus, didn't you just acquire that vineyard in Napa? We should celebrate properly." Marcus's smile was genuine for the first time all evening. A small operation. Only produces about 12,000 bottles annually. Nothing too impressive. Modest as always. Michael laughed. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, addressing the nearby tables directly, my friend Marcus just bought a $20 million vineyard and calls it a small operation. The revelation rippled through the dining room like a stone thrown into still water. $20 million was serious money, even by Sterling Club standards. Combined with the Warren Buffett phone call and the obvious friendship with Michael Sterling, it painted a picture of someone far more significant than anyone had initially realized. Madison stood frozen beside their table, her server's pad forgotten in her hands, watching her world begin to crumble, one revelation at a time. You know what I love about you, Marcus, Michael said, as Roberto poured 2 glasses of wine that cost more per bottle than most people's monthly rent. You never let success change who you are. Still the same guy who used to study in the library until they kicked us out at midnight. Marcus raised his glass in a mock toast. And you're still the guy who convinced me to apply to Goldman Sachs, even though we both knew they'd never hire a kid from Detroit. Their loss was Silicon Valley's gain, Michael replied, though I still say you should have let me invest in your second company. I could have been even richer than I already am. The conversation was loud enough to carry to nearby tables each anecdote carefully chosen to establish Marcus's credentials while maintaining the casual intimacy of old friends catching up. But beneath the surface, both men were playing a deeper game, Marcus documenting every slight for the legal case he was building, Michael using his privilege to protect his friend while exposing the club's hypocrisy. Remember Professor Davidson's entrepreneurship class? Michael continued. When he said you had interesting ideas, but questioned whether you had the cultural background to build a successful company. Marcus's laugh held no warmth. I remember. 3 years later, when Google bought my first company for $2.3 billion, he tried to take credit for inspiring my success. $2.3 billion. Michael repeated loudly enough for the entire section to hear. At 28 years old. Not bad for someone who supposedly lacked the right cultural background. Tyler Chen's live stream had exploded to over 5,000 viewers. The comments section was moving too fast to follow, but Tyler caught glimpses of the conversation happening in real time. Screenshots of Marcus's Forbes profile were being shared. Articles about Washington enterprises were being posted. The story was escaping the confines of the Sterling Club and becoming something much larger. Madison approached their table again, this time accompanied by Douglas Whitfield, the Sterling Club's general manager. Douglas was 61 years old, silver-haired, and had spent his entire career in luxury hospitality. He could smell a public relations disaster from 3 blocks away, and this situation was already trending on social media. Mr. Sterling, Mr. Washington Douglas said, with the kind of smooth professionalism that comes from decades of crisis management. I do hope everything is meeting your expectations this evening. Actually, Douglas Michael said, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, we were just discussing Marcus's membership application. Madison was explaining your procedures. Douglas's eyes flicked to Madison, who looked like she wanted to sink through the floor. Of course. Mr. Washington's application is receiving our full attention. These things simply take time to process properly. 6 months, Marcus said quietly. It's been 6 months since I submitted my application, along with financial statements, references, and a personal essay about my commitment to the club's values. 6 months, Michael repeated thoughtfully. That does seem excessive, doesn't it, Douglas? My application was approved in 6 days. The comparison hung in the air like an accusation. Everyone in the room understood the implication that processing time had nothing to do with paperwork and everything to do with the applicant's skin color. Each application is unique, Douglas said carefully. Mr. Washington's background requires additional verification. His background. Michael said, his voice gaining an edge that made several nearby diners look up from their conversations. You mean his $8 billion net worth, his Harvard MBA, his congressional testimony on economic policy? Which part of his background exactly requires additional verification? The questions were surgical strikes, each one exposing another layer of the club's discriminatory practices. Douglas was trapped between his loyalty to the institution and his recognition that the situation was spiraling beyond control. Marcus pulled out his phone as it buzzed with another call. This time the caller ID read U.S. Senate, Economics Committee. "Excuse me," Marcus said politely. "Senator Williams needs to discuss tomorrow's hearing on tech industry regulation." He answered the call with casual authority, discussing congressional testimony and federal policy, with the kind of insider knowledge that made it clear he wasn't just successful, he was influential at the highest levels of government. When he ended the call, the entire section of the dining room had gone quiet. Conversations at nearby tables had stopped entirely as diners strained to process what they'd just witnessed. "Sorry about that," Marcus said to Michael. "The Senate Economics Committee wants to review my testimony before tomorrow's hearing. Apparently, my recommendations on antitrust legislation are causing some concern among certain tech CEOs." "Which CEOs?" Michael asked with obvious interest. Marcus named 3 billionaires whose companies were household names, describing their lobbying efforts with the kind of specific detail that only came from direct involvement in high-level policy discussions. At the table next to them, a tech executive who'd been following the conversation pulled out his phone and began frantically Googling. Within moments, he was reading articles about Marcus Washington's role as an informal economic advisor to the White House, his testimony before Congress, and his inclusion on Time magazine's list of the most influential people in American business. "Jesus Christ," the executive whispered to his dinner companion. "Do you know who that is? That's Marcus Washington. The Marcus Washington." The revelation rippled through the dining room like wildfire. Phones appeared at every table as diners began searching for information about the man who'd been treated like an unwelcome intruder 30 minutes earlier. Madison Cooper's face had gone from white to green. As a Stanford graduate, she was smart enough to understand what was happening. She'd discriminated against one of the most powerful men in America, and she'd done it in front of witnesses' cameras and the club's owner. "You know what's interesting?" Marcus said to Michael, his voice carrying across the now silent dining room. "I've been documenting instances of discrimination in upscale establishments for the past 5 years. For research purposes, you understand. I'm writing a book about systemic racism in American business." Michael's eyes lit up with genuine interest. "Really? What's the working title?" "The Price of Prejudice: How Discrimination Costs American Business Billions," Marcus replied. "Tonight's experience will make an excellent case study." The words landed like bombs in the silent dining room. Everyone understood that they weren't just witnessing discrimination. They were witnessing it being documented by someone with the power and platform to expose it on a national scale. Douglas Whitfield's practiced composure finally cracked. "Mr. Washington, I'm sure there's been some misunderstanding." "Has there?" Marcus interrupted gently. "Miss Cooper told me that people like me don't belong here. She suggested I try Popeyes instead. She questioned my identification, my reservation, and my right to be in this establishment." Which part was the misunderstanding? The questions hung in the air like indictments. Douglas looked around the dining room, taking in the sea of phones, recording every word, the live stream that had turned his exclusive club into a viral sensation, and the growing crowd of diners who were no longer pretending not to listen. "I think," Michael said quietly, "it's time we discussed this situation with the club's ownership." Douglas's face went ashen. The ownership. Michael's smile was sharp as broken glass. Did I forget to mention I'm selling my stake in Sterling Holdings LLC? The new owner takes possession at 9 p.m. tonight. He checked his watch with theatrical precision. That's about 8 minutes from now. Douglas and Madison stared at him in confusion, but Marcus was already reaching for his briefcase. From it, he withdrew a leather portfolio that he placed on the table between them. "Allow me to introduce myself properly," Marcus said, his voice carrying a new authority that made the entire dining room lean forward. "Marcus Washington, CEO of Washington Enterprises, and as of 9 p.m. tonight, the new owner of the Sterling Club." The silence that followed was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop in the marble lobby. Then Marcus's phone buzzed with a text message. He glanced at it and smiled. "The wire transfer just cleared," he announced. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the new Sterling Club, where everyone belongs." The silence that followed Marcus's announcement stretched for exactly 17 seconds. Tyler Chen counted them as his livestream viewer count exploded past 10,000 comments, flooding in so fast they became an incomprehensible blur of shock, excitement, and disbelief. Then, Douglas Whitfield found his voice. "That's impossible," he said, but the words came out strangled, lacking conviction. "The Sterling family would never sell. This club has been in their family for 3 generations. Michael Sterling leaned back in his chair with the casual arrogance of old money, swirling his wine like he was watching an amusing play. "Douglas, you seem confused about something fundamental. The Sterling family doesn't own this club. Sterling Holdings LLC owns this club, and majority shareholders can sell their stakes to whomever they choose." He pulled out his own phone and showed Douglas the screen, a legal document time-stamped 8:47 p.m. signed and notarized, transferring controlling interest in Sterling Holdings LLC to Washington Enterprises. "I've been planning this sale for 18 months, Michael continued conversationally. "Ever since Marcus told me about his experiences with the membership application process. Amazing how discrimination becomes a business liability when someone has the resources to do something about it." Madison Cooper was hyperventilating. Her perfect blonde hair was disheveled from running her hands through it, and her makeup was starting to smudge around her eyes. The confident hostess who'd told Marcus Washington he didn't belong was watching her entire world collapse in real time. "This can't be happening," she whispered. "This can't be real." Marcus opened his leather portfolio and withdrew a stack of documents. "Miss Cooper, I need you to understand something. This isn't revenge. This isn't even personal. This is simply business." He spread the documents across the table: financial statements, legal contracts, and official filings with the state of California. Sterling Holdings LLC generates approximately $12 million in annual revenue. But demographic analysis shows you're operating at 63% of potential capacity due to exclusionary membership practices. The numbers were devastating in their precision. Marcus had done his homework, analyzing every aspect of the Sterling Club's operations with the thoroughness of someone who'd built an empire by understanding how systems worked. Conservative estimates suggest this establishment could generate $19 million annually with inclusive membership policies. Marcus continued. "You're leaving $7 million on the table every year because you refuse to serve people who look like me." Douglas's face had gone gray. As a hospitality professional, he understood the implications immediately. $7 million in lost revenue meant lost jobs, lost bonuses, lost opportunities for everyone who worked at the club. Furthermore, Marcus said, pulling out another set of documents, "I've documented 47 separate instances of discriminatory behavior over the past 6 months. Miss Cooper alone is responsible for 23 of those incidents." He looked directly at Madison, who was now crying openly. "Did you think no one was keeping track? Did you think there wouldn't be consequences?" Roberto Martinez had been watching from across the dining room, and he slowly approached their table with the careful steps of someone entering a crime scene. As one of the few staff members who'd shown Marcus basic respect, he was curious about what would happen next. Roberto, Marcus said without looking up from his documents. "How long have you worked here?" 8 years, sir," Roberto replied quietly. "And in those 8 years, how many black members have you served?" Roberto's eyes darted to Douglas, who was shaking his head frantically, trying to signal him not to answer. But Roberto had watched the entire evening unfold, had seen how Marcus had been treated, despite his obvious wealth and success. "Honestly, sir, maybe a dozen. Total. In 8 years. A dozen," Marcus repeated. "Out of how many total members?" "About 2,000, sir." The math was simple and damning. Less than 1% of the Sterling Club's membership was black, in a city where the black population was over 8%. The discrimination wasn't subtle or accidental. It was systematic and deliberate. Marcus turned to Tyler Chen, whose live stream had become the most watched event on Instagram that night. "Mr. Chen, you've been documenting this evening. Have you captured everything clearly?" Tyler nodded, his phone still recording. "Everything, sir. The whole conversation is being live streamed." "Excellent," Marcus said, "because I want there to be no question about what happened here tonight." He stood up from the table, and the entire dining room seemed to hold its breath. At 6 feet tall, Marcus Washington commanded attention without trying, but now he carried himself with the unmistakable authority of ownership. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying across the silent restaurant, "I want to thank you for witnessing what institutional racism looks like in practice. For 70 years, the Sterling Club has maintained a culture of exclusion disguised as tradition. Tonight, that changes." Phones appeared at every table recording what was clearly a historic moment. The story was already spreading beyond Tyler's live stream, shared and reshared across social media platforms, picked up by news outlets monitoring viral content. Effective immediately, Marcus continued. "Madison Cooper's employment is terminated for discriminatory conduct that violates federal civil rights statutes." Madison's sob echoed through the dining room, but Marcus wasn't finished. "Douglas Whitfield, your employment is terminated for enabling and perpetuating discriminatory practices." Douglas started to protest, but Marcus held up a hand for silence. "Roberto Martinez, you are promoted to general manager, effective immediately. Your new salary is $150,000 annually, plus benefits and profit sharing." Roberto's eyes widened in shock. From waiter to general manager in a single evening, simply because he treated a guest with basic human dignity. "The Sterling Club will reopen in 2 weeks under new management, with new policies, and a commitment to serving excellence to everyone, regardless of race, religion, or background." Marcus sat back down and picked up his wine glass. "Now, Michael, shall we finish our dinner?" The transformation of the Sterling Club's atmosphere was instantaneous and complete. The moment Marcus Washington announced his ownership, every dynamic in the room shifted like tectonic plates rearranging themselves. Power, it seemed, had a gravity all its own. Tyler Chen's live stream had broken Instagram servers twice, crashing under the weight of 27,000 simultaneous viewers. The story was spreading across social media platforms faster than wildfire, with Sterling Club Revolution trending nationally within minutes. News outlets were scrambling to verify the story, calling contacts at business schools and tech companies, trying to understand how a routine dinner reservation had become the most watched corporate takeover in social media history. But inside the dining room, the real drama was just beginning. Madison Cooper sat crumpled in a chair someone had brought from another table, her perfect composure destroyed beyond repair. The confident hostess who'd told Marcus he didn't belong was now facing the reality that she'd discriminated against her own boss. Her phone buzzed constantly with notifications, friends and former colleagues sharing videos of her humiliation, her name trending on Twitter alongside words like racist and fired. I didn't know, she kept repeating between sobs. I didn't know who you were. Marcus looked at her with something that might have been pity. Miss Cooper, that's exactly the problem. You didn't need to know who I was. You should have treated me with basic human dignity, regardless of my net worth or social connections. He pulled out his phone and showed her the screen, a recording app that had been running for the past 90 minutes. I've documented every word you said tonight, every microaggression, every coded phrase, every moment you made assumptions about me based on the color of my skin. Madison's face went even whiter as she realized the implications. This wasn't just about losing her job. This was about having her discrimination documented and broadcast to millions of people. Your exact words were, and I quote, "People like you don't belong in establishments like this. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable at the Popeyes down the street." Marcus's voice was calm, almost clinical. Those words are now part of the permanent record. Douglas Whitfield was frantically making phone calls, trying to reach lawyers, board members, anyone who might be able to undo what had just happened. But the legal documents spread across the table told a different story. Every signature notarized, every filing properly submitted, every aspect of the acquisition completed with the thoroughness of someone who'd planned every detail months in advance. This was a setup, Douglas said, his voice hollow with realization. You planned this whole thing. I documented it, Marcus corrected. There's a difference. Everything that happened tonight happened because of choices your staff made. I simply gave them the opportunity to reveal who they really were. Roberto Martinez stood nearby, still processing his promotion from waiter to general manager. 8 years of serving entitled customers while watching discrimination play out nightly had prepared him for many things, but not for this. His hands shook slightly as he held the employment contract Marcus had handed him. Sir Roberto said quietly, I don't understand. Why me? Marcus smiled for the first time all evening, a genuine expression of warmth that transformed his entire face. Because tonight, when everyone else saw my skin color first, you saw a customer who deserved respect. That's exactly the kind of leadership this establishment needs. From across the dining room, other staff members watched with a mixture of fear and hope. The Sterling Club had operated with an unspoken hierarchy for decades. Certain types of people served, others were served, and everyone understood their place. Now, a black man owned the building, and nobody knew what came next. Chef Antoine Williams emerged from the kitchen, drawn by the commotion and the rumors flying through the staff. He was the only black employee in the kitchen hired, despite resistance from management, because his culinary skills were undeniable. For 3 years, he'd endured comments about urban flavor profiles and suggestions that he might be more comfortable at different types of establishments. When he saw Marcus standing in the dining room as the owner, Antoine's eyes filled with tears. For the first time in his career, he was looking at someone who understood what it felt like to be the only black face in rooms full of privilege. Mr. Washington, Antoine said, approaching with the careful dignity of someone who'd learned to navigate hostile environments. I just want you to know this means everything. Marcus gripped the chef's shoulder with genuine warmth. What's your specialty? Chef Williams' fusion cuisine, sir. Classical French techniques with influences from my grandmother's Louisiana cooking. Starting tomorrow, that fusion menu becomes our signature offering, Marcus announced. I want every diner to experience excellence that reflects the diversity of this city. The nearby tables had emptied as word of the ownership change spread. Some diners left in disgust, unwilling to remain in an establishment now owned by someone they'd probably discriminated against themselves. Others stayed out of curiosity, sensing they were witnessing history being made. Michael Sterling watched it all with the satisfaction of someone whose long-term plan had finally come to fruition. His friendship with Marcus dated back to their Harvard days when they'd bonded over shared experiences of navigating elite institutions that weren't designed for people like them. Marcus, because of his race. Michael, because he'd refused to embrace the casual racism of his social class. "You know what the beautiful part is," Michael said to Marcus as they watched Madison collect her belongings. She could have simply said, "Welcome to the Sterling Club, Mr. Washington. Right this way to your table." This all could have been avoided with basic professional courtesy. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. But then, we wouldn't have documented the system in action. Sometimes, you have to let people reveal who they really are. Tyler Chen's live stream was now being monitored by major news networks. CNN had reached out for an interview. The New York Times was assigning reporters to the story, and business schools were already discussing how to incorporate the evening's events into their case study curricula. The story had everything that made content viral in the social media age: clear villains and heroes, dramatic reversals of fortune, and the satisfaction of watching justice served in real time. But beneath the entertainment value was something more significant: documented proof of how institutional racism operated in supposedly post-racial America. Marcus's phone rang again. This time the caller ID showed the White House. He answered with characteristic calm. "Marcus, Washington." The conversation was brief but audible to nearby tables. Something about rescheduling a breakfast meeting to discuss infrastructure policy, spoken with the casual authority of someone who regularly advised the federal government on economic matters. When he hung up, the dining room was completely silent, except for the soft clicking of phone cameras recording every moment. "That was the president's chief of staff," Marcus announced to no one in particular. "Apparently, my testimony to Congress tomorrow is causing some concern among certain industry leaders." He looked around the room, taking in the faces of people who were rapidly recalculating everything they thought they knew about power privilege and who deserved respect in American society. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus said, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who'd just rewritten the rules of the game, "welcome to the future of American hospitality. A future where excellence isn't limited by prejudice, where success isn't constrained by skin color, and where everyone who walks through these doors will be treated with the dignity they deserve." The revolution, it turned out, had been catered. The aftermath of Marcus Washington's revelation played out like dominoes falling in slow motion, each consequence triggering the next in an inevitable cascade of change. The Sterling Club's dining room had become a theater where 70 years of institutional racism was being dismantled in real-time broadcast to an audience that had grown to over 50,000 viewers across multiple social media platforms. Madison Cooper's professional destruction was swift and merciless. As she gathered her belongings, under the watchful eyes of phones recording her every movement, her phone buzzed constantly with notifications. Her Instagram account was being flooded with comments. Her LinkedIn profile was being screenshot and shared. Her name was trending on Twitter alongside hashtags like racist hostess and Sterling Club karma. "This will ruin me," she whispered to Douglas Whitfield as security guards waited to escort her from the building. "My career, my reputation, everything." Douglas, facing his own termination, had little sympathy to offer. "You brought this on yourself, Madison. We all saw this coming." But that wasn't entirely true. What they'd seen was business as usual. The casual, systemic exclusion that had operated smoothly for decades without consequence. What they hadn't anticipated was that their usual victim would turn out to be someone with the power to destroy their entire system. Marcus stood at the center of the dining room, like a conductor, orchestrating a symphony of justice. His next announcement sent shockwaves through the assembled crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, I want to address the staff directly," he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. This institution has operated on a foundation of discrimination disguised as tradition. That ends tonight." He gestured to Roberto, who was still processing his sudden promotion. "Mr. Martinez will implement immediate policy changes. First, all staff will undergo comprehensive bias training within the next 30 days. Anyone unwilling to participate will be terminated." Murmurs rippled through the crowd of employees who'd gathered to watch their workplace transform before their eyes. Some looked relieved, others terrified. The comfortable certainties of their discriminatory system were crumbling. Second, Marcus continued, "We are implementing transparent hiring practices with a commitment to diversity that reflects Los Angeles demographics. The staff of this establishment will look like the community it serves." Chef Antoine Williams stepped forward, his voice carrying across the dining room. "Mr. Washington, sir, what about the kitchen staff? We've been underrepresented for years." Marcus's smile was genuine and warm. "Chef Williams, you're now head of culinary operations. I want you to hire the best chefs you can find regardless of their background. Excellence has no color." The promotion sent visible shockwaves through the kitchen staff. Antoine had been marginalized for 3 years. His suggestions, dismissed, his contributions minimized. Now he was running the entire operation. Tyler Chen's live stream had become appointment viewing. Comments flooded in from viewers around the world, sharing their own stories of discrimination, celebrating the dramatic reversal of fortune, analyzing every aspect of the evening's events. Sterling Club Revolution was trending in 12 countries. But the real drama was happening at the tables of existing members who'd witnessed the entire confrontation. The Sterling Club's clientele represented the cream of Los Angeles society entertainment executives, tech billionaires, old money families who'd held power for generations. They were watching their exclusive sanctuary become something unthinkably different. At Table 6, entertainment mogul Richard Castellanos was having an animated phone conversation with his publicist. "I don't care what it costs," he was saying. "I need a statement distancing myself from this place immediately. My entire brand is about inclusion and diversity." The irony was lost on no one. Castellanos had been a member for 15 years, happily enjoying the club's exclusionary practices until they became publicly embarrassing. At Table 14, tech CEO Jennifer Morrison was furiously typing on her phone, crafting a LinkedIn post about the important conversation we need to have about systemic racism in elite institutions. Tomorrow she'd present herself as an ally who'd always opposed discrimination, despite dining regularly at an establishment that practiced it openly. Marcus watched the performance with amusement. "Interesting how quickly people discover their principles when cameras are rolling," he observed to Michael. "That's the beautiful part about viral video," Michael replied. "It makes hypocrisy expensive." The most dramatic transformation was happening among the staff. Workers who'd been complicit in discrimination were scrambling to position themselves as secret allies, while those who'd shown basic human decency found themselves suddenly valued and promoted. Sarah Chen, a server who'd worked at the club for 4 years, approached Marcus with tears in her eyes. "Mr. Washington, I want to apologize. I saw how Madison treated you and other guests, and I never spoke up. I was scared for my job." Marcus studied her face carefully. "What would you do differently now, Miss Chen?" Everything she said without hesitation. "I'd speak up. I'd report discrimination. I'd quit before I'd be part of something like this again." "Then you have a future here," Marcus said simply. "We're promoting you to training coordinator for the new diversity initiative." The speed of the transformations was dizzying. In 90 minutes, the Sterling Club had gone from a bastion of exclusion to a laboratory for inclusive excellence. But the changes weren't just cosmetic. They represented a fundamental shift in how power operated. Douglas Whitfield made one last desperate attempt to salvage his position. "Mr. Washington," he said, approaching with the careful steps of someone walking on thin ice. Perhaps we could discuss a transition period. I have 15 years of experience managing this establishment. Marcus's response was swift and final. Mr. Whitfield, you have 15 years of experience managing discrimination. That's not the kind of expertise we need going forward. The rejection was captured by multiple cameras, ensuring that Douglas's failure would be preserved forever in the digital record. His professional reputation, like Madison's, was destroyed beyond repair. Roberto Martinez was adapting to his new role with remarkable speed. Despite his nervousness, he moved through the dining room with growing confidence, taking notes on immediate changes needed, consulting with staff about policy implementations. Sir Roberto said to Marcus, "What about current members who might be uncomfortable with the changes?" It was a diplomatic way of asking about the racist members who would undoubtedly object to the club's new inclusive policies. Marcus's answer was broadcast to every viewer of Tyler's stream. "Mr. Martinez, anyone uncomfortable with treating all guests with equal respect is welcome to seek membership elsewhere. We're not running a museum of bigotry." The statement was definitive and uncompromising. The Sterling Club under Marcus Washington would serve everyone with excellence, or it would serve no one at all. As the evening wound down, the true scope of the transformation became clear. This wasn't just about one restaurant or one incident of discrimination. Marcus had documented and dismantled an entire system of exclusion, creating a template that could be applied to country clubs, corporate boards, and elite institutions across America. The viral video was already being analyzed by civil rights organizations, used as evidence in other discrimination cases, and studied by business schools as an example of how individual action could create systemic change. But perhaps the most powerful moment came when Chef Antoine emerged from the kitchen, carrying a dessert he'd prepared specially for Marcus, a deconstructed peach cobbler that combined classical French technique with his grandmother's Louisiana recipe. "This is what fusion looks like," Mr. Washington Antoine said as he placed the dessert on the table. "Different traditions coming together to create something beautiful." Marcus tasted the dessert and closed his eyes, savoring flavors that told the story of American diversity in a single bite. Chef Williams, he said, "This is exactly what I want people to experience when they dine here. Excellence that celebrates our differences instead of hiding them." As Marcus and Michael finished their meal, the dining room gradually returned to something approaching normal operation. But nothing would ever be normal again. The Sterling Club had been transformed from a symbol of exclusion into a beacon of inclusive excellence, and the entire process had been documented for history. The revolution, it turned out, tasted like peach cobbler, and justice served at the perfect temperature. At exactly 9 p.m., 3 figures in charcoal gray Tom Ford suits entered the Sterling Club like harbingers of a new era. They moved with the purposeful stride of people accustomed to reshaping reality with legal documents and wire transfers. The lead figure was Sarah Mitchell, Harvard Law School's youngest ever civil rights clinic director, now serving as Marcus Washington's chief legal counsel. The dining room, which had been buzzing with nervous energy and whispered conversations, fell silent as the legal team approached Marcus's table. Tyler Chen's live stream viewer count had climbed past 60,000, making it one of the most watched real-time events in Instagram history. Mr. Washington's Sarah Mitchell announced, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd argued cases before the Supreme Court. "The acquisition is complete. All documentation has been filed with the state of California, and the wire transfer cleared at 8:47 p.m. She placed a leather briefcase on the table and withdrew a stack of documents with the kind of ceremonial precision usually reserved for treaties between nations. Sterling Holdings, LLC, is now a wholly owned subsidiary of Washington Enterprises. The words hit the remaining diners like a physical force. Several people actually gasped audibly. An elderly woman at table 9 clutched her pearls so hard she broke the strands, sending diamonds scattering across the marble floor like fallen stars. The purchase price was $47 million. Sarah continued, ensuring her words carried to every corner of the room. Payment in full. No financing, no contingencies. Douglas Whitfield, who'd been desperately making phone calls for the past hour, finally found his voice. This is impossible. The Sterling family built this place. They would never sell to... He stopped himself before completing the sentence, but everyone understood what he'd been about to say. Michael Sterling stood up, his movement commanding instant attention. At 35, he carried himself with the easy confidence of someone who'd never questioned his right to be anywhere but tonight. There was something different in his posture. The satisfaction of someone whose carefully orchestrated plan had finally reached its conclusion. Douglas Michael said, his voice carrying across the silent dining room. You seem to be operating under a fundamental misunderstanding about how business works. He pulled out his phone and displayed a document that made Douglas's face go white. This is the corporate structure of Sterling Holdings, LLC. My family owns 63% of the shares. I personally control 31%. As of today, I've sold my entire stake to Marcus Washington. The revelation sent shockwaves through the assembled crowd. Michael Sterling hadn't just facilitated the sale, he'd been planning it all along. The evening's events weren't random discrimination caught on camera. They were a carefully orchestrated exposure of institutional racism. You sold to him. Madison Cooper's voice was shrill with disbelief. You sold our club to him. Michael's smile was colder than Beverly Hills winter. Madison, let me explain something about privilege that they apparently didn't teach at Stanford. Real power isn't about excluding people who threaten you. It's about choosing who deserves your support. He gestured toward Marcus with obvious respect. 15 years ago, Marcus Washington was my roommate at Harvard Business School. I watched him face discrimination that would have broken lesser men. I watched him build an empire despite barriers that never should have existed. And I decided that when the time came, I wanted to be on the right side of history. Tyler Chen's stream was breaking the internet. Screenshots of the legal documents were being shared across social media platforms. Sterling Club sold was trending alongside justice served and privilege checked. News outlets were scrambling to verify the story, calling contacts at business schools and corporate law firms. But the real drama was playing out in the faces of the Sterling Club's staff and members. Some looked horrified, others amazed, but everyone understood they were witnessing something unprecedented. A complete reversal of traditional power structures documented in real time for the world to see. Marcus stood and addressed the room with the quiet authority of someone who'd just proven that justice was possible when it was backed by sufficient resources. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to be clear about what's happening here tonight. His voice carried to every corner of the dining room, ensuring that everyone's staff members and the 60,000 people watching online understood the significance of the moment. This isn't about revenge. It's not about humiliation or payback. This is about transformation. He paused, letting the words sink in. For 70 years, the Sterling Club has operated as a symbol of exclusion. Tonight, it becomes a symbol of inclusion. Sarah Mitchell opened her briefcase and withdrew another set of documents. Effective immediately, all existing employment contracts are under review. Staff members who demonstrate commitment to inclusive service will be retained with enhanced compensation and benefits. She looked directly at Madison Cooper, who was still sitting in shock. Miss Cooper, your discriminatory conduct tonight violated Title II of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which prohibits discrimination in places of public accommodation. While the Sterling Club operates as a private establishment, your behavior created liability under federal law. The legal language was precise and devastating. Madison wasn't just fired. She was potentially facing civil rights violations that could follow her for the rest of her career. However, Marcus interjected, "I'm not interested in destroying lives. I'm interested in changing systems." He pulled out his phone and showed Madison the screen, a recording app that had been running for the entire evening. "Miss Cooper, you have two choices. You can face the legal consequences of your actions tonight, or you can become part of the solution." Madison's voice was barely a whisper. "What do you mean Washington Enterprises operates a diversity training program for hospitality professionals?" Marcus explained. 6 months of intensive education about unconscious bias, inclusive service, and cultural competency. Complete the program successfully, and tonight's events remain a private matter. Refuse, and the documentation goes public. It was an offer of redemption that nobody expected. The man who'd been humiliated was extending grace to the woman who'd humiliated him. Tyler Chen's stream exploded with comments about mercy and justice, second chances and accountability. Roberto Martinez stepped forward, still processing his elevation from waiter to general manager. "Mr. Washington, what about the rest of the staff?" Marcus's answer was broadcast to 60,000 viewers and would be quoted in business schools for decades to come. "Mr. Martinez, we're going to prove that inclusive excellence isn't just morally right, it's financially superior." He gestured towards Sarah Mitchell, who withdrew a tablet and activated a presentation. Charts and graphs appeared on the screen, showing demographic data, revenue projections, and market analysis. The Sterling Club currently operates at 63% capacity, Marcus announced. Demographic analysis shows that eliminating discriminatory practices could increase membership by 40% within 18 months. The numbers were staggering. 40% more members meant millions in additional revenue, hundreds of new jobs, and exponential growth potential. Furthermore, Marcus continued inclusive establishments show higher employee retention, better customer satisfaction, and stronger brand loyalty. "We're not just changing who can eat here. We're changing how successful this business can be." Douglas Whitfield made one final desperate attempt to salvage his position. "Mr. Washington, with respect, this establishment has operated successfully for 70 years. Perhaps tradition has value that shouldn't be discarded lightly." Marcus's response was swift and final. Mr. Whitfield's slavery was also a tradition that operated successfully for generations. Tradition without justice is just institutionalized oppression with better marketing. The comparison was stark and undeniable. Several members actually stood up and walked out, unwilling to remain in an establishment where their prejudices were being compared to slavery. Their departure was captured by multiple cameras, ensuring their reaction would be preserved forever. But others remained, some out of curiosity, others because they recognized they were witnessing history being made. The Sterling Club was being transformed from a symbol of exclusion into something entirely new, a demonstration that change was possible when it was backed by sufficient power and determination. Marcus's phone buzzed with a text message. He glanced at it and smiled. The story is already being picked up by CNN, the New York Times, and the Washington Post. By tomorrow morning, this evening's events will be case studies in business schools across the country. He looked around the dining room, taking in the faces of people whose world had been fundamentally altered in the space of 2 hours. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the future of American hospitality. A future where your membership is determined by your character, not your color." The revolution, it seemed, came with excellent legal documentation. The first 24 hours after Marcus Washington's acquisition of the Sterling Club moved with the speed and precision of a military operation. By 10 a.m. the following morning, Tyler Chen's viral live stream had been viewed over 2 million times, making it the most watched instance of institutional racism being dismantled in real time in social media history. But the real transformation was happening inside the club itself, where Roberto Martinez was discovering that revolution came with a remarkable amount of paperwork. Sir Roberto said to Marcus, as they stood in what had been Douglas Whitfield's office, "I've never managed anything bigger than a dinner rush." "Are you sure about this promotion?" Marcus was reviewing employment files with the focused intensity he'd once applied to congressional testimony. Each folder represented a decision point which staff members had enabled discrimination, which had simply remained silent, and which had shown the basic human decency that would serve as the foundation for the club's new culture. "Roberto, do you know why I chose you?" Marcus asked without looking up from the files. "It wasn't because of your management experience. It was because last night when everyone else saw my skin color first, you saw a customer who deserved respect." He pulled out a particular file, Madison Cooper's employment record filled with glowing reviews from supervisors who'd valued her ability to maintain standards and preserve the club's atmosphere. The coded language was unmistakable to anyone who understood how discrimination operated in elite institutions. "Excellence isn't about keeping certain people out," Marcus continued. "It's about bringing the best out of everyone who walks through these doors." The kitchen had become the epicenter of the club's transformation. Chef Antoine Williams was implementing changes with the enthusiasm of someone who'd been waiting years for the opportunity to showcase his true abilities. His new menu reflected the diversity Marcus envisioned, classical French techniques applied to ingredients and flavors from around the world. "Mr. Washington," Antoine said, as Marcus toured the kitchen, "I've designed a tasting menu that tells the story of American cuisine. Each dish represents a different cultural tradition that's shaped our food culture." The first course was a deconstructed Vietnamese spring roll with ingredients sourced from local immigrant farmers. The second featured traditional Southern techniques applied to locally caught seafood. The progression continued through dishes that celebrated Mexican, Ethiopian, Korean, and Native American culinary traditions. "This is what America tastes like." Antoine explained, his voice filled with the pride of someone finally allowed to express his full artistic vision. Not just one tradition, but all of them coming together. The staff training program launched immediately, led by Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a Harvard-trained psychologist who specialized in unconscious bias education. Her first session with the Sterling Club's employees was attended by everyone from busboys to sommeliers. "Discrimination isn't usually about conscious hatred," Dr. Rodriguez explained to the assembled staff. "It's about unconscious assumptions, about seeing certain types of people as belonging and others as out of place." She projected images on the wall, the same person in different clothing, the same qualifications presented by people of different races, the same behavior interpreted differently based on demographic assumptions. "Your job isn't just to serve food and pour wine," she continued. "Your job is to make every guest feel like they belong here regardless of what they look like or where they come from." Madison Cooper sat in the back of the room, having accepted Marcus's offer of redemption through education. Her presence was awkward, but her attention was complete. The confident hostess, who'd told Marcus he didn't belong, was now learning why her assumptions had been both morally wrong and financially devastating. The membership applications that had been deliberately delayed or denied were being expedited with surgical precision. Marcus had assembled a team of civil rights attorneys to review every rejection from the past 5 years, looking for patterns of discrimination that violated federal law. "We've identified 47 applications that were rejected, despite meeting all stated criteria," Sarah Mitchell reported during the first staff meeting under new management. "The common factor isn't financial qualification or professional standing. It's demographics." She displayed a chart that told the story in stark numbers. Applications from white candidates: 89% approval rate, average processing time, 6 days. Applications from black candidates: 12% approval rate, average processing time, 4.7 months. The discrimination wasn't subtle or accidental. It was systematic and documented. We're contacting every rejected applicant to offer immediate membership, Marcus announced. No initiation fees, no waiting periods. Justice delayed shouldn't become justice denied. Roberto was learning to navigate his new responsibilities with the guidance of a management consultant Marcus had brought in from Washington Enterprises. The transition from server to general manager was challenging, but Roberto's natural leadership abilities were emerging under proper support. The key is consistency, the consultant explained. Every guest gets the same level of service, regardless of their appearance or perceived status. Excellence isn't about exclusion. It's about inclusion at the highest level. By noon, word of the transformation had spread throughout Beverly Hills. Reporters were stationed outside the club, interviewing anyone willing to discuss the previous evening's events. Business leaders were being asked to comment on discrimination in their own industries. The story had transcended one restaurant to become a broader conversation about institutional racism in American business. Tyler Chen had become an overnight celebrity, his Instagram following jumping from 12,000 to 800,000 in less than 24 hours. News outlets were interviewing him about the role of social media in documenting discrimination, about the power of viral content to create accountability. I was just documenting what I saw, Tyler told CNN during a live interview. But sometimes documenting injustice is the first step toward correcting it. The most profound changes were happening in the staff break room, where conversations about race and privilege were taking place for the first time in the Sterling Club's 70-year history. Workers who'd never discussed discrimination were sharing their own experiences, their observations of how certain guests had been treated differently. Maria Santos, a server who'd worked at the club for 6 years, spoke up during one of Dr. Rodriguez's training sessions. "I always wondered why we had so few black members," she said quietly. "I thought maybe they just weren't interested in this type of establishment." "That's exactly how systemic discrimination works," Dr. Rodriguez explained. "It makes exclusion seem natural, like certain people just don't belong, rather than acknowledging that barriers have been deliberately constructed." The revelation was profound for staff members who'd participated in discrimination without recognizing it as such. They'd been trained to see exclusion as tradition, prejudice as preference, racism as maintaining standards. Chef Antoine's kitchen was becoming a laboratory for inclusive excellence. He'd hired 3 new cooks, a Korean-American woman who specialized in fusion techniques, a Mexican chef whose family had run restaurants for 3 generations, and a young black culinary school graduate who'd been rejected from jobs at establishments less prestigious than the Sterling Club. "Diversity isn't about politics," Antoine explained to a food blogger documenting the kitchen's transformation. "It's about excellence. Different perspectives create better food, more creativity, higher standards." The lunch service that day was a revelation. Members who'd expected to find chaos instead discovered elevated cuisine, improved service, and an atmosphere that felt more welcoming than exclusive. The changes weren't just cosmetic, they were qualitative improvements that enhanced everyone's experience. By evening, Marcus was reviewing the day's financial reports with satisfaction. Despite losing several racist members who'd canceled their memberships in protest, the club had received 43 new membership applications, scheduled 12 corporate events, and booked 3 private dining reservations from entertainment industry executives who wanted to be associated with the transformation. "Inclusion isn't just morally right," Marcus told Roberto as they reviewed the numbers. "It's financially superior. We've generated more revenue in one day than this place typically sees in a week." The revolution was proving profitable, sustainable, and inspiring. The Sterling Club was becoming a model for how institutional change could happen when it was backed by sufficient resources and unwavering commitment to justice. As Marcus prepared to leave that first day, he found Madison Cooper waiting by the hostess station. Her designer clothes had been replaced by the simple uniform of a trainee. Her confident demeanor transformed into something approaching humility. "Mr. Washington," she said quietly, "I wanted to thank you for giving me a second chance." Marcus studied her face, looking for signs of genuine transformation rather than calculated performance. "Miss Cooper's second chances aren't gifts. They're opportunities to prove you've learned from your mistakes." "I understand," she replied. "I'm learning that everything I thought I knew about service, about hospitality, about treating people with dignity, I was wrong about all of it." It was Marcus reflected exactly the kind of conversation that made transformation worthwhile. The Sterling Club wasn't just changing its policies. It was changing hearts and minds, one person at a time. That night, long after the last reporter had left, and the dining room had returned to quiet elegance, Marcus Washington stood alone on the Sterling Club's private balcony, looking out over the glittering lights of Beverly Hills. The city spread before him like a constellation of possibilities, each light representing dreams, ambitions, and the complex interplay of power and privilege that had shaped his entire life. From his jacket pocket, he withdrew a worn photograph of his mother, Sarah Washington, standing outside their cramped Detroit apartment building in 1995. She was wearing her best dress, the one she'd saved for church and special occasions, smiling despite the exhaustion that came from working 3 jobs to keep her son fed and hopeful. "We did it," Mama Marcus whispered to the photograph, his voice carrying the weight of 30 years of struggle, success, and the bittersweet knowledge that the person who'd believed in him most wouldn't witness his greatest triumph. Sarah Washington had died believing her son would change the world, but she'd never lived to see him become wealthy enough to buy the very type of establishment that had once excluded them both. The irony wasn't lost on Marcus. He'd gained the power to transform systems of oppression only after accumulating enough wealth to transcend them personally. The balcony door opened quietly behind him, and Michael Sterling stepped outside, carrying 2 glasses of 30-year-old scotch. For a moment, the 2 men stood in comfortable silence, processing the magnitude of what they'd accomplished together. "Your mother would be proud," Michael said simply, understanding without explanation the significance of Marcus's solitary moment. Marcus accepted the scotch with a nod of gratitude. "She used to tell me that dignity wasn't something other people could give you or take away, that it came from knowing your own worth, regardless of how others treated you." He took a sip of the scotch-tasting complexity that reminded him of his journey, sharp notes of struggle balanced by the smooth finish of success. But tonight proved she was only partially right. Dignity matters, but power matters more. Without the resources to buy this place, all the dignity in the world wouldn't have changed anything. Michael leaned against the balcony railing, his blonde hair catching the light from the city below. Their friendship had been forged in the exclusive halls of Harvard Business School, where Michael's privilege had collided with his conscience, and Marcus's brilliance had confronted systemic barriers that shouldn't have existed. "Do you remember Professor Davidson's entrepreneurship class?" Michael asked. "When he said you had interesting ideas, but questioned whether you had the right background to build a successful company." Marcus's laugh held no warmth. "I remember. 3 years later, when Google bought my company for $2.3 billion, he tried to take credit for inspiring my unconventional approach to innovation." "Some people only recognize excellence when it comes with a price tag," Michael observed. "Tonight you put a $47 million price tag on justice." The comment carried layers of meaning. Marcus had used the system that oppressed him to purchase the power to change it. Capitalism, that most American of institutions, had become the vehicle for dismantling institutional racism, at least in this small corner of Beverly Hills. Marcus's phone buzzed with a text message from his daughter Aisha, who was finishing her sophomore year at Stanford. "Dad, I saw the video. I'm proud of you. When I bring friends home for spring break, we'll finally have a place where everyone feels welcome." The message brought tears to Marcus's eyes that he hadn't shed in years. This wasn't just about his own experiences with discrimination. It was about creating a world where his daughter would never face the humiliation he'd endured, where her children would grow up assuming respect rather than fighting for it. "You know what the hardest part was?" Marcus said, his voice carrying the exhaustion that comes after adrenaline fades. "Staying calm while Madison Cooper told me I didn't belong. Everything in me wanted to respond with anger to match her hostility with my own." He paused, swirling the scotch in his glass. But anger would have played into every stereotype about aggressive black men. Anger would have given them an excuse to call security to paint me as the problem. So I stayed calm, documented everything, and let them reveal who they really were. Michael nodded, understanding the calculated restraint that Marcus's position had required. That's the thing about systemic racism. It forces its victims to be better than their oppressors, to respond to hatred with dignity, to meet prejudice with perfection. "But perfection isn't enough," Marcus replied. "I had perfect credentials, perfect manners, perfect composure. None of that mattered until I had perfect power." The conversation was interrupted by another text message, this one from Warren Buffett. "Saw the news. Brilliant strategy. When you're ready to do the same thing to some country clubs in Omaha, call me." Marcus smiled at the message, recognizing that his actions had resonated beyond Los Angeles, inspiring other wealthy individuals to consider how they might use their resources to combat discrimination. "This is just the beginning," Marcus said, looking out over the city with the eyes of someone who'd learned that change was possible when it was backed by sufficient determination and resources. Washington Enterprises is going to identify every exclusive establishment that practices discrimination. We're going to document it, expose it, and then buy it. "A hostile takeover of institutional racism," Michael said with obvious admiration. "I like it." "Not hostile," Marcus corrected. "Transformative. We're not destroying these places. We're showing them what they could become if they lived up to their stated values of excellence." As they finished their scotch, Marcus felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. His success had given him power, but power came with obligations to use it wisely, to create lasting change, to ensure that the next generation wouldn't need to accumulate billions just to be treated with basic human dignity. The revolution was just beginning, and Marcus Washington was ready to lead it. By 6 a.m. Pacific Time, Marcus Washington's transformation of the Sterling Club had become the most discussed story on American social media. Tyler Chen's live stream had been viewed over 5 million times, spawning thousands of reaction videos, analysis threads, and commentary from everyone from civil rights leaders to business school professors. The hashtag Sterling Club Revolution was trending in 47 countries, translated into dozens of languages, and being discussed on morning news shows from New York to London to Tokyo. But the real impact was being felt in boardrooms, country clubs, and exclusive establishments across America, where executives were frantically reviewing their own policies and practices. CNN's morning coverage featured a split-screen Tyler Chen being interviewed live from outside the Sterling Club, while civil rights attorney Benjamin Crump provided legal analysis from Washington, D.C. "What we witnessed last night," Crump explained to the national audience, was systematic racism being documented and dismantled in real time. Mr. Washington didn't just fight discrimination. He created a template for how wealth and power can be used to force institutional change. The business implications were immediate and far-reaching. Within hours of the story breaking, 3 major country clubs in Manhattan had contacted Washington Enterprises requesting diversity consultations. 2 luxury hotels in Miami had announced new inclusive hiring initiatives. A private dining club in San Francisco had preemptively fired 2 managers with histories of discriminatory behavior. "The market is responding faster than legislation ever could," explained Harvard Business School professor Dr. Patricia Williams during a CNBC interview. When discrimination becomes a viral liability, businesses change their practices overnight. But the story's impact extended far beyond corporate boardrooms. Marcus's demonstration that individual action could create systemic change had inspired copycat efforts across the country. In Chicago, a group of black tech executives announced plans to purchase a historically exclusive golf club. In Atlanta, entertainment industry leaders were pooling resources to acquire and transform several high-end restaurants with histories of discrimination. The Sterling Club itself had become a pilgrimage site for advocates of social justice. By noon, a steady stream of visitors were arriving to eat at the establishment that had become a symbol of transformative change. Reservation requests were pouring in from civil rights leaders, business executives, and ordinary people who wanted to experience inclusive excellence. Madison Cooper's journey from hostess to pariah to redemption candidate had become its own viral phenomenon. Her willingness to undergo bias training rather than face legal consequences had sparked intense debate about accountability, forgiveness, and the possibility of genuine change. Some people don't deserve second chances, read one popular tweet with 127,000 likes. Others prove that growth is possible when faced with real consequences. The counter-narrative was equally passionate. Madison Cooper had the courage to admit she was wrong and do the work to change. That's what redemption looks like. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, the psychologist leading the Sterling Club's bias training program, found herself fielding interview requests from major media outlets, eager to understand how racist attitudes could be systematically addressed and changed. Transformation is possible, she told the Today Show audience, but it requires more than apologies or good intentions. It requires sustained education, accountability measures, and genuine commitment to change. The hospitality industry was experiencing what trade publications were calling the Sterling effect. Restaurant associations were updating their diversity guidelines. Culinary schools were incorporating bias training into their curricula. Hotel chains were reviewing their hiring and service practices. Chef Antoine Williams had become the face of professional transformation. His fusion menu celebrating American diversity was being featured in Food and Wine magazine, and his story of advancement despite discrimination was inspiring minority culinary professionals across the country. Excellence was always there, Antoine explained, during a live cooking demonstration on the Food Network. But for too long, certain voices were excluded from the conversation. When you include everyone, the food gets better, the service improves, and the entire experience is elevated. The legal implications were equally significant. Civil rights attorneys were using Marcus's documentation techniques as templates for building discrimination cases. The Department of Justice had announced a review of private club practices, citing recent evidence of systematic exclusion based on protected characteristics, what Mr. Washington accomplished, explained legal scholar Professor Jonathan Turley during a Fox News interview, was creating an evidentiary record that transforms individual discrimination into documented institutional bias. That's legally powerful. The political ramifications were immediate. Congressional Democrats had announced hearings on discrimination in private establishments. Republican leaders were calling for voluntary industry reform rather than federal regulation. The story had become a flashpoint in broader debates about racism, capitalism, and the role of government in enforcing civil rights. But perhaps the most significant impact was on young people who saw Marcus's actions as proof that change was possible when backed by sufficient resources and determination. Business schools reported a surge in applications from minority students interested in studying strategic social entrepreneurship. High school students were organizing to document discrimination in their own communities. Aisha Washington, Marcus's daughter, had become an inadvertent spokesperson for the next generation's approach to social justice. Her TikTok video explaining her father's strategy had garnered 3 million views and inspired hundreds of response videos from young people sharing their own experiences with discrimination. My dad didn't just get angry, Aisha explained to her followers. He got strategic. He documented everything, built the power to create change, and then used that power to transform systems rather than just complaining about them. The international response was equally significant. Media outlets in countries with their own histories of institutional racism were analyzing the story as a case study in how individual action could force systemic change. Business leaders in London, Toronto, and Sydney were reviewing their own establishments' practices, but the most profound impact was happening at the Sterling Club itself, where transformation was occurring, one interaction at a time. Members who'd initially opposed the changes were discovering that inclusive excellence enhanced rather than diminished their dining experience. Staff morale had improved dramatically as workers felt valued and supported rather than complicit in discrimination. Roberto Martinez's promotion from waiter to general manager had become a symbol of meritocracy, replacing hierarchy based on privilege. His success was inspiring other service industry professionals to see advancement as possible, regardless of their background. 6 months ago, I was invisible, Roberto told a reporter from the Los Angeles Times. Management saw me as just another server, not someone with leadership potential. Now I'm running one of the most exclusive establishments in Beverly Hills, proving that talent exists everywhere when you're willing to recognize it. The ripple effects continued expanding throughout the week. Other businesses associated with the Sterling Club, from wine suppliers to linen services, were being asked about their own diversity practices. The transformation had created accountability pressure throughout an entire supply chain. Marcus's phone was ringing constantly, with requests for interviews, consulting contracts, and speaking engagements. Harvard Business School wanted him to teach a case study course. Netflix was exploring documentary rights. Publishers were competing for his memoir. But Marcus remained focused on the work itself, rather than the celebrity it had generated. Washington Enterprises had identified 17 other exclusive establishments with documented histories of discrimination. The Sterling Club was just the beginning of a broader campaign to transform American hospitality through strategic acquisition and systematic reform. This isn't about me, Marcus told a gathering of civil rights leaders who'd come to the Sterling Club to discuss replicating his strategy. This is about proving that change is possible when individual action meets institutional power. We're not just documenting discrimination anymore, we're eliminating it. The revolution that had started with a dinner reservation was becoming a movement that would reshape how America thought about inclusion, excellence, and the responsibility that came with wealth and power. 30 days after Marcus Washington's acquisition of the Sterling Club, the transformation was complete in ways that exceeded even his ambitious vision. The establishment that had once symbolized exclusion had become a beacon of inclusive excellence, attracting visitors from around the world who came to witness what institutional change looked like in practice. The numbers told the story of revolution made profitable. Membership applications had increased by 340%, with a waiting list that reflected the true diversity of Los Angeles. Revenue was up 47% compared to the same period the previous year. Staff turnover had dropped to 0, while employee satisfaction surveys showed ratings that hospitality industry experts called unprecedented. Roberto Martinez stood in the lobby that had once been the site of his humiliation, now wearing the confident bearing of someone who discovered leadership abilities he never knew he possessed. The transformation from server to general manager had been documented by business schools as a case study in recognizing hidden talent within existing organizations. Mr. Washington, Roberto said as Marcus arrived for his monthly review meeting, "I have the diversity metrics you requested." The statistics were remarkable. The Sterling Club's membership was now 34% non-white, closely reflecting Los Angeles demographics. The staff was 41% minority, including management positions that had been exclusively white for 7 decades. Customer satisfaction scores had reached levels that industry analysts called best in class. But the changes went beyond demographics to fundamental improvements in service quality and culinary excellence. Chef Antoine Williams' fusion menu had been featured in Bon Appetit magazine as the future of American fine dining, while Michelin inspectors had reportedly made multiple anonymous visits, fueling speculation about a potential star rating. Madison Cooper's transformation had become its own story of redemption and growth. After completing 6 months of intensive bias training, she'd been hired back as assistant manager of guest relations, specifically tasked with ensuring that every visitor felt genuinely welcome, regardless of their background, Mr. Washington Madison said, as she approached with obvious nervousness. "I wanted to thank you again for giving me the opportunity to grow from my mistakes." Her transformation appeared genuine rather than performative. The confident hostess who'd once wielded exclusion as power had been replaced by someone who understood that true hospitality meant making everyone feel valued and respected. How do you ensure that genuine change has occurred, rather than just better behavior? Marcus asked a question that cut to the heart of institutional transformation. Madison's answer reflected months of education and self-reflection. "I've learned that changing behavior isn't enough if the underlying attitudes remain the same. I had to confront my own unconscious biases, understand how privilege shaped my assumptions, and develop genuine empathy for experiences different from my own." The dining room during lunch service was a testament to the power of inclusive excellence. At table 12, the same spot where Marcus had been reluctantly seated during his initial confrontation, a multi-generational Korean-American family was celebrating a grandmother's 80th birthday. Their server, Maria Santos, moved between English and Spanish with natural ease, making each family member feel personally attended to. Nearby, a table of entertainment industry executives was conducting a business meeting that would have been impossible under the club's previous culture. The group included Black, Latino, and Asian professionals who were reshaping Hollywood's approach to diverse storytelling. Their presence at the Sterling Club wasn't tokenism, but recognition that excellence came from inclusion rather than exclusion. Tyler Chen had become a regular patron, documenting the club's ongoing transformation for his now massive social media following. His monthly Sterling Club updates had become appointment viewing for people interested in how systemic change could be sustained and improved over time. "What strikes me most," Tyler said during his latest video update, "is how normal excellence feels when it includes everyone. This isn't diversity theater or social justice performance art. This is just what good business looks like when it's done right." The club's wine program had been completely reimagined under the direction of sommelier Carmen Rodriguez, who'd been promoted from server after demonstrating exceptional knowledge of viticulture. Her selection featured bottles from minority-owned vineyards, alongside traditional European estates, creating a collection that told the story of global wine culture, rather than just French and Italian traditions. "Diversity isn't about checking boxes," Carmen explained to a wine magazine, profiling the club's transformation. "It's about recognizing excellence wherever it exists." Some of the most innovative winemaking is happening at small minority-owned vineyards that never had access to exclusive restaurant programs before. The private dining rooms that had once hosted conversations reinforcing privilege and exclusion now served as venues for discussions about social justice, economic equity, and systemic change. Civil rights leaders regularly held strategy sessions over meals prepared by chefs who understood that food could be a form of cultural bridge building. Dr. Elena Rodriguez's bias training program had been expanded into a comprehensive curriculum that other establishments were requesting to license. The Sterling Club's approach to transformation was being studied and replicated by businesses across multiple industries. What makes this program successful Dr. Rodriguez explained during a Harvard Business School webinar, is that it addresses unconscious bias as a systemic problem rather than individual failing. We change policies, practices, and culture simultaneously. The most profound change was in the club's relationship with the surrounding community. Under previous management, the Sterling Club had existed as an island of privilege, separated from the diverse neighborhoods around it. Now, community engagement was central to its mission. Monthly community appreciation dinners brought together local business owners, community leaders, and residents who would never have been welcomed under the previous regime. These events weren't charity, but recognition that the club existed within and should contribute to the broader community. Marcus had instituted a scholarship program, providing hospitality training to young people from underserved communities. 10 students were currently enrolled in a program that combined traditional culinary education with courses on business management, financial literacy, and leadership development. This isn't about giving handouts, Marcus explained to a group of business leaders who'd come to study the club's community engagement model. It's about identifying talent that's been overlooked by traditional systems and providing the support needed for it to flourish. The legal implications of the Sterling Club's transformation continued to reverberate throughout the hospitality industry. 3 discrimination lawsuits against other establishments had been settled using documentation techniques Marcus had pioneered. The Department of Justice had announced new guidelines for investigating bias in private clubs. But perhaps the most significant change was psychological rather than legal or financial. The Sterling Club had proven that institutional transformation was possible when it was backed by sufficient resources and genuine commitment to change. The success story was inspiring similar efforts across the country. Marcus's phone buzzed with a text from Warren Buffett. Berkshire Hathaway wants to invest in your next acquisition. How many more clubs need fixing? The message reflected growing recognition that Marcus's approach wasn't just about social justice, but about identifying and correcting inefficiencies in business systems. Discrimination wasn't just morally wrong. It was economically wasteful, leaving money on the table that inclusive excellence could capture. As Marcus prepared to leave after his monthly review, he encountered a scene that perfectly captured the club's transformation. In the lobby, a young black girl was having her picture taken next to the Hostess station, where Madison Cooper had once told Marcus he didn't belong. "Someday I'm going to work somewhere like this," the girl told her parents, with the confidence of someone who'd never been told she didn't deserve to dream big. Marcus smiled, remembering his own childhood promise to his mother that he'd someday own places that had rejected them. The cycle of exclusion had been broken, replaced by a cycle of inclusion that would inspire the next generation to reach even higher. The revolution wasn't complete. It was expanding one establishment, one heart, one mind at a time. 6 months after the night that changed everything, Marcus Washington stood before a packed auditorium at Harvard Business School, delivering the most anticipated lecture in the institution's recent history. The case study of the Sterling Club transformation had become required reading in courses on leadership, social entrepreneurship, and strategic management across universities worldwide. "The question you're really asking," Marcus said in response to a student's inquiry about replicating his strategy, "isn't how to document discrimination. It's how to build the power necessary to transform systems, rather than just complaining about them." The lecture hall, filled with future business leaders from every background imaginable, represented exactly the kind of diversity that institutions like the Sterling Club had spent decades excluding. Now these students were learning how individual action backed by sufficient resources and strategic thinking could create systemic change. The Marcus Washington Foundation had grown into a $100 million endowment dedicated to identifying and dismantling discriminatory practices in American business. The foundation's approach was surgical in its precision, documenting bias, acquiring controlling interests in problematic establishments, and implementing transformation programs that proved inclusion was profitable. We've completed 17 acquisitions in the past 6 months, Marcus told the Harvard audience. Hotels in Miami, country clubs in Connecticut, private dining establishments in San Francisco. Each transformation follows the same template document. The discrimination demonstrate the economic cost and implement inclusive excellence. The results were consistently remarkable. Every acquired establishment had seen increases in revenue, customer satisfaction, and employee retention. The financial case for inclusion was becoming undeniable even to business leaders who remained unmoved by moral arguments. Tyler Chen, whose viral documentation had started the movement, was now Harvard's youngest ever visiting lecturer on social media and activism. His course, Digital Documentation and Social Change, was oversubscribed by students eager to learn how technology could be used to create accountability. The power of viral content isn't just in exposing injustice, Tyler explained to his students. It's in creating permanent records that make denial impossible and change inevitable. His live stream of the Sterling Club confrontation had been preserved in the Library of Congress as a historic document studied by researchers examining how social media was reshaping activism and institutional accountability. Madison Cooper's journey from perpetrator to educator had become a case study in redemption and transformation. After completing her bias training, she'd become a certified diversity consultant, working with establishments to identify and eliminate discriminatory practices before they became viral disasters. I can recognize the warning signs because I was the warning sign, Madison explained during a CNBC interview about her career transformation. My experience with Mr. Washington taught me that unconscious bias isn't an excuse. It's a problem that requires conscious solutions. Her consulting firm, Second Chance Solutions, had been hired by dozens of establishments seeking to avoid the kind of public exposure that had transformed the Sterling Club. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The woman who'd once embodied institutional racism was now helping eliminate it. The Sterling Standard had become the hospitality industry's gold standard for inclusive excellence. The certification program administered by the Marcus Washington Foundation provided training assessment and ongoing monitoring for establishments committed to serving all customers with equal dignity. It's not enough to not discriminate, explained Dr. Elena Rodriguez, now the Foundation's Director of Transformation Programs. Excellence requires actively creating cultures where everyone feels welcomed and valued. Over 200 establishments had achieved Sterling Standard certification, creating a network of businesses committed to inclusive excellence. The economic benefits were substantial. Certified establishments reported average revenue increases of 23% and customer satisfaction scores that consistently exceeded industry benchmarks. Roberto Martinez had become the most sought-after general manager in luxury hospitality. His transformation from server to leader, inspiring similar promotions throughout the industry. His memoir, From the Service Side, was being developed into a Netflix documentary about recognizing talent in unexpected places. Mr. Washington didn't just change my career, Roberto told audiences during speaking engagements at hospitality conferences. He changed my understanding of what leadership means. Real leaders create opportunities for others to discover their own potential. Chef Antoine Williams's fusion cuisine had earned the Sterling Club its first Michelin star, making it the first establishment to receive the prestigious rating while operating under explicitly inclusive policies. His cookbook, The Flavor of Inclusion, had become a bestseller, inspiring chefs nationwide to expand their understanding of American cuisine. The political impact had been equally significant. The Congressional Black Caucus had invited Marcus to testify about using economic leverage to combat discrimination. Senator Elizabeth Warren had proposed legislation providing tax incentives for businesses achieving diversity benchmarks. Even conservative Republicans were acknowledging that discrimination was bad for business. This isn't about liberal or conservative politics, Marcus told the Senate Banking Committee during his testimony. This is about American businesses operating at full capacity rather than limiting themselves through prejudice. The international response had been remarkable. Business leaders in London, Toronto, and Sydney were studying Marcus's strategies to address discrimination in their own contexts. The Sterling Club model was being adapted for different cultural contexts, but with consistent results. Inclusion improved both social justice and business performance. Perhaps most significantly, Marcus's approach had inspired a new generation of wealthy individuals to use their resources for systematic social change. The term strategic philanthropy had evolved to include direct intervention in discriminatory institutions, rather than just funding advocacy organizations. We're seeing the emergence of what I call activist capitalism, explained Harvard economist Dr. Raj Chetty. Wealthy individuals using market mechanisms to force social change, rather than waiting for government regulation or voluntary compliance. Marcus's influence extended beyond business to popular culture. His story had inspired a HBO limited series, multiple documentaries, and a best-selling biography. But he remained focused on the work itself, rather than the celebrity it had generated. The goal isn't fame, Marcus told a gathering of young entrepreneurs at the Foundation's annual summit. The goal is transformation. Every exclusive institution that becomes inclusive, every barrier that gets eliminated, every young person who sees possibility where they once saw rejection. That's how change spreads. The most powerful validation came from the next generation. Aisha Washington, now a senior at Stanford, had chosen to write her honors thesis on economic strategies for social justice, analyzing how her father's approach could be scaled and replicated across industries. Dad proved that individual action can create institutional change, Aisha told the Stanford Daily in an interview that went viral. Now my generation has to prove we can make that change permanent and universal. As Marcus concluded his Harvard lecture, a student raised her hand with a question that captured the evening's significance. Mr. Washington, what advice would you give to someone who faces discrimination but doesn't have billions of dollars to buy their way to justice? Marcus's answer would be quoted in business schools for decades to come. Build power. Document everything. Find allies with resources and conscience. And remember that justice isn't a destination. It's a process that requires constant vigilance and strategic action. The revolution that had started with a dinner reservation had become a movement that was reshaping American business, one establishment, one heart, one mind at a time. As Marcus Washington's extraordinary evening at the Sterling Club demonstrates, transformation is possible when courage meets capability, when documentation meets determination, and when individual action is backed by the power to create real change. But this story isn't just about one man's triumph over discrimination. It's about a template for systematic social change that anyone can apply. The revolution that began with Tyler Chen's live stream and Marcus's strategic response has already spread far beyond Beverly Hills. Across America, people are using the tools and techniques pioneered that night to document discrimination, build coalitions for change, and transform institutions that have operated on exclusion for far too long. Your voice matters in this movement. Every time you witness discrimination, whether it's at a restaurant, a country club, a corporate office, or any institution that treats people differently based on their appearance rather than their character, you have the power to create change. Pull out your phone. Document what you see. Share the story. Make denial impossible. The Sterling Club transformation succeeded because witnesses like Tyler Chen refused to remain silent. His decision to live stream the confrontation created accountability that forced change. You can do the same in your community, at your workplace, in any situation. where injustice needs sunlight to survive. If you've experienced discrimination yourself, know that your story has power. Marcus Washington spent years documenting every slight, every microaggression, every moment when he was treated as less than human because of his skin color. That documentation became the foundation for legal action, strategic intervention, and systematic transformation. Share your experiences in the comments below. Tell us about times when you were excluded, overlooked, or dismissed because of who you are, rather than what you can contribute. These stories matter because they reveal patterns that individual incidents might hide. They build the case for change that institutions can no longer ignore. But documentation alone isn't enough. Real transformation requires strategic action, backed by resources and alliances. Look for opportunities to build power within existing systems. Support businesses that practice inclusive excellence. Invest your time, money, and energy in organizations committed to justice, rather than just profit. If you're in a position of privilege, whether that's wealth, social connections, or institutional access, use that privilege to amplify voices that have been silenced and create opportunities for people who've been excluded. Michael Sterling's decision to sell his stake to Marcus Washington shows how privilege can be deployed for justice rather than perpetuating inequality. The Sterling Standard Certification Program provides a roadmap for businesses ready to move beyond performative diversity to genuine inclusive excellence. Encourage establishments you frequent to pursue certification. Hold your favorite restaurants, clubs, and service providers accountable for treating all customers with equal dignity. For young people watching this story unfold, understand that you have more power than previous generations to create change. Social media, viral content, and digital documentation have democratized accountability in ways that make injustice expensive and inclusion profitable. Use these tools strategically, thoughtfully, and persistently. Subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell to stay updated on similar stories of strategic social change. Share this video with someone who needs to see that transformation is possible when individual courage meets collective action. The revolution that started at the Sterling Club is spreading to country clubs in Connecticut, hotels in Miami, corporate offices in Manhattan, and exclusive institutions across America. Each transformation proves that change is possible when it's backed by sufficient determination and strategic thinking. What systemic changes would you implement if you had Marcus Washington's resources and influence? How would you use wealth, privilege, or platform to transform institutions that practice exclusion? Let's discuss solutions that move beyond individual incidents to create industry-wide transformation. Together, we can build a more inclusive world, one business at a time, one decision at a time, one courageous action at a time. The revolution continues, and your voice is part of it. Justice isn't just about what happened at the Sterling Club. It's about what happens next in your community, with your choices, through your actions. The future of American hospitality and American society is being written right now. Make sure your chapter contributes to the story of inclusion, excellence, and transformation that began with one man's refusal to accept discrimination as the price of dining out. The revolution will be documented, shared, and unstoppable.